very warm welcome to the DGAP Morning Briefing. My name is Guntram Wolff. I'm the director of the German Council on Foreign Relations, and today it's my pleasure to welcome you to our morning briefing on Russia's war against Ukraine, the military and humanitarian situation ahead of the winter. We have a stellar lineup of colleagues, but most of all, let me welcome German ambassador to Kiev, to Ukraine, Anka Feldhusen, who is with us today live from Ukraine. She just told me she is connected via mobile data because the wireless LAN is down, and I'm sure she will tell us more about the current situation in Kiev. We've all seen the dramatic bombing of critical infrastructure in Ukraine, which is affecting citizens in their everyday life, and of course have led to the mayor of Kiev already predicting that this winter may be the toughest winter since the Second World War for citizens of Kiev because of lack of proper infrastructure that has been bombed. And so Anka Feldhusen is the German ambassador to Kiev and has been a strong proponent of Germany's support to Ukraine, which I think in the current situation is even more needed than before. That's humanitarian, but financial is very, very important. But of course, also military support is going to be very, very important this winter. And so without much further ado, I just want to thank you, Ambassador, for being with us. Thank all of you for listening, and I very much look forward to the debate. I myself will not participate in the debate today, but I will listen very attentively and perhaps jump in with a question at a later stage. Thank you so much, and over to you, Henning Hoff, Executive Editor of International Politics Quarterly. He will guide us through today's discussion. Henning.
Many thanks, Guntram. Also a very, very warm welcome from my side this morning. I will keep it very short today, maybe just to say that on this day, we passed the 9-month mark of the war. On the 24th of February, of course, Russia invaded Ukraine, and this is sort of still ongoing. There has been very little movement on the front line in recent days. András will tell us more in a moment, but the situation in Ukraine has become more dramatic as a consequence of Russia's attacks, often launched from remote places far beyond Ukraine's borders on the country's civilian infrastructure. There are worries, as Guntram already mentioned. What Vitaly Klitschko said, it might be the worst winter since the end of World War II. At the same time, there are question marks whether military aid and resupplies, munitions in particular, reach Ukrainian forces in a timely fashion. To discuss all these questions today, as Guntram already mentioned, we have the great honor and pleasure to welcome Ambassador Anka Feldhusen. She has been ambassador to Ukraine since July 2019. After serving earlier in her career already 2 times in Kiev, she was a press and protocol officer during the 1990s, and she was deputy ambassador to Kiev between 2010 and 2015. Before returning to Ukraine, she served as departmental head at the German President's Office, dealing with questions of foreign policy. On orders of Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, she and her core team evacuated, I believe, just the day before the invasion started, but returned in early May. And I think she will give us a sense of the situation, which Guntram has already alluded to. The second speaker is Dr. András Rácz, a senior fellow at the International Order and Democracy Program here at the German Council on Foreign Relations and a leading expert of the Russian military. András will once again share his views on the military situation on the ground. Very good morning to you, András, as well. And the third speaker is Dr. Stefan Meister, head of the International Order and Democracy Program and one of Germany's leading Russia experts. He will speak to what is happening inside Russia and how it will affect Russia's foreign policy and also the conduct of the war. Welcome, Stefan.
Morning.
Each speaker has about 6 to 7 minutes for their introductory remarks. We will be opening up for your questions and comments after roughly 30 minutes. For the Q&A, please raise your hand, introduce yourself, and put your question in person to the panel or submit questions and comments via the chat function. Please note that this event will be recorded and that we will have to close on time at 9:30 a.m. And at this point, I'd like to thank my colleague Milan Nitsch, the DGAP's Central and Eastern Europe expert, who has been instrumental in organizing the DGAP morning briefings. And now, without any further ado, Ambassador Feldhusen, floor is yours.
Thank you, everybody, and good morning also to everybody wherever you are. It was already said, we have no Wi-Fi since yesterday, but I do hope the connection will last. I also speak on all military issues under the friendly supervision of our defense attaché, who is online with us. Yes, Ukraine is in a war since 2014, actually. You reminded the audience that I have been here as deputy head of mission from 2010 to 2015. I was actually here when the war started in summer 2014. When I came back in 2019, most people had kind of forgotten that the war still lasted and almost somebody died on the front line. And when I visited the contact line, it reminded me a lot of World War I with the trenches and how both sides were fighting. Since the 24th of February, this has changed. The Ukrainians call it a massive, full-fledged invasion, full-fledged aggression. Nevertheless, when I was in Germany in summer, the war seemed kind of far away again. And only the massive attacks since October 10th have changed that again. Yesterday, it was the 6th of those massive Russian attacks. And it was also a lot of rockets that flew towards Ukraine, towards Kiev, especially, more than 30. 21 of them were shot down, but the system in general is getting more, less stable. So the consequences this time were worse than the other times. We have had no water since yesterday afternoon. I already mentioned the Wi-Fi. Electricity and heating are weak, but at least mobile data works and we can communicate. This is not serving, from my point of view, Russia on the military field. So this is meant to demoralize Ukrainians in this war. The point is, Ukrainians don't let themselves be demoralized. And something I realized last week when I was in Germany for a short relaxation period, it was worse watching the attack on the 15th of November from outside than from inside. I was with my team in thoughts, and it felt worse than being here with them in our shelter in the embassy basement. And I think that's a general remark. Things look different from Berlin than they do from here. Here, when the alarm goes off, we have rules that we follow. And if you follow those rules, you at least have a very high chance not to be hurt or killed. The Ukrainians show a really remarkable fighting spirit. They defend their country, their fatherland. And I think the question of motivation in this war cannot be overestimated. You've read all the news, so many, and now again with what Boris Johnson said, so many people were convinced that Russia would win this war quickly. But the Ukrainians are so motivated and so creative, and they did the most that they could with what they had in terms of weapons and soldiers. And especially the air defense, I think, has shown how effective it can be now also with our help, but since the beginning of the war. The other part of the motivation and the fighting spirit of the Ukrainians is the fact that they do want to enter the EU. They feel a part of Europe, and they want to show to the world that they are part of Europe and of the EU too. In general, the war has shown that that Ukraine is not a failed state. Many of the international organizations, the UN, who are now providing a lot of humanitarian help, had to learn that they're not in Africa, they're not in a failed state. Everything continued basically as normal, and digitalization in the last years has helped a lot for the state to continue functioning. This is also something that sometimes is forgotten in the West when we look at this war in Ukraine. On the military aspects, yes, I have made the steep learning curves on weapons and 3 languages and all that, but I'm definitely not an expert, and I leave that to Mr. Rácz. What I do want to say is that our support for, very concretely, for the air defense with the IRIS-T system came the day after the first massive attack on October 10th. It has proven to be very efficient. The Ukrainians are very happy with that. But what for me mattered even more is it pushed our partners to also deliver more, or sometimes for the first time, air defense systems. This is something that I have always wondered about, why we were not faster. And we, I mean all of us, not only Germany, because since February 24th, it was clear that this was a missile war. Basically every day. Kiev was lucky until the 10th of October. The East has experienced this missile war in a much worse scenario. And the second point is, this war is really a showcase for NATO. I think people at NATO headquarters are really, really watching this closely here, and perhaps sometimes a little bit frighteningly, because it has shown that our ideas about logistics, our ideas about the amount of ammunition, our ideas about compatibility here of ammunition, especially for artillery here with these 155 ammunition, is not exactly what we thought. The Ukrainians really wanted Western artillery because they thought they could use then any ammunition, and it just didn't work from country to country. This is an experience, I think, that will be extremely valuable to NATO. And of course, Ukraine uses this also as an argument to say, we need to be part of NATO. You will be able to learn a lot from us. And to close this, because I think my 6 minutes are already over, the issue with the Panzerhaubitzen is just the same. The fact that they need to be maintained and fixed much faster than in any NATO exercise that they have probably served in. In real war conditions, you need more ammunition, you use these weapons more, and they need to be maintained more, and you need to deal with that. So these are kind of, how to say, these are things that I have learned from this situation, which is indeed absolutely unique. And I cannot say I'm happy to be here, but I feel really honored to be at the side of the Ukrainians in this extremely harsh times. And the fact that none of the embassies has left since October 10th, and we were not even asked to leave. We didn't have to fight. That is a good sign. We want to show Ukraine that we are on their side. In Ukraine, I cannot tell, since the time is over, what else we've done in all the other fields of humanitarian aid. Perhaps just one sentence to close. We will not be able to fix the consequences of the war endlessly, neither in financial nor in humanitarian or reconstruction. The war in itself. The war in itself has to end. This is a big country, and it will need already a lot of money to rebuild it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Feldhusen, for this these insightful remarks. Let's move on to András, please, and I'm sure we have a lot of questions after our panel has spoken. András, please.
Thank you, Henning. Good morning to everybody, and thank you for having me here again. It's an honor and a pleasure to speak after Ambassador Feldhusen, so just let me add a few operational and some strategic details as well about how the war itself is going on the front lines. So as usual, please allow me to share my screen. As usual, we are going to use the maps produced by the Institute for the Study of War because these are the best daily updated maps. First, let's start with this larger strategic map to overview the general situation. Since Ukraine liberated Kherson and the western part of the Kherson region, the Kherson front line has become almost fully calm. The river functions as a de facto line of contact, and even though Ukraine made small landing on the eastern side of the river, there are some artillery exchanges going on, but still the Kherson front line is largely calm. And with the winter setting in, it can be reasonably expected that the river Dnipro will keep functioning as a de facto line of contact. However, on the other two front lines, so the northern parts of the Luhansk region and the Donbass, the situation has become a lot more intensive, and from Ukraine's perspective, particularly in the Donbass, a lot worse. What happened after the liberation of Kherson, both sides regrouped most of their forces from the Kherson front line to the other front lines. Let's take a closer look there. This is the former Kharkiv front line. Now it's already about the northern parts of the Luhansk region. Here, Ukraine is able to advance very, very slowly, but Russians managed to stabilize their defensive lines to a certain extent, also because Russia deployed here a huge number of mobilized personnel. Not properly trained, not properly equipped, but still very, very large in numbers. If one looks at the publicly available Russian data on Russian losses, you see that Russian personnel losses have been skyrocketing, basically doubling on some front lines. The reason for this increase is not that the fighting has become more intensive, but there are a lot more people in the Russian trenches. So these mobilized people have been pushed to the front line in large numbers. Here we are talking about more than 40,000, possibly already 60,000 who are already in the front line. And there are more than 80,000 who are somewhere already in Ukraine. Still here in the northern parts of the Luhansk region, Ukraine still seems to have the initiative, but the front line or the combat activities have slowed down. The situation from Ukraine's perspective is a lot worse in the Donbass. Russia regrouped most of its forces from Kherson to the Donbass region. Here, they also keep using the Wagner group and again, a large number of mobilized personnel, and they keep pushing just very hard with everything they have to capture Bakhmut here in the north and the Vuhledar salient here down in the southeast. Here, Russia seems to be returning to the tactics seen during the summer. So they use very heavy artillery barrage to basically downgrade Ukraine's defenses and thereafter send in the infantry. Both sides are suffering heavy losses. If one listens to Ukrainian experts, they are very, very pessimistic about the sustainability here of the Donbass front line, simply because of the losses they are suffering. The interesting element about the Donbass is that despite more than 8 months of fighting, Russia managed to gain only very marginal territories, particularly here around Marinka, Avdiivka, and this section of the front line. So compared to the length of the war and the resources spent on it, this indicates that, the minimal Russian gains indicate that Ukraine's defenses, which have been built already for 8 years, and here I think it's important to emphasize what Ambassador Feldhusen has said, that this war has been going on for more than 8 years, and Ukraine spent these 8 years in a very productive way, particularly in the Donbass. So they really fortified their positions, which gives certain element of hope that even with high Ukrainian losses, the fortifications are likely to hold for a considerable while more. When it comes to the missile war, and this is my last point here, Russia apparently still has enough missiles to sustain an intensive campaign against Ukraine's civilian critical infrastructure. All available, publicly available sources agree that Russia is slowly and gradually running out of the missiles, precision-guided munition, what they have. But we don't know what's the minimum threshold below which they cannot go. So we don't know whether it's 20% of their missiles or 30% of the missiles which they are not allowed to spend on Ukraine, but have to save for strategic purposes. Still, so far, Moscow is able to sustain this missile campaign. The good news here is that Ukraine's air defense is very effective against cruise missiles and particularly against drones. The bad news is that this Ukrainian air defense is not designed to take down massive number of ballistic missiles. So if Iranian missiles appear on the front line, so far they haven't, but if Iran really starts delivering ballistic missiles to Russia, then Ukraine's situation might get a lot worse when it comes to defending herself against these missiles. Last thing on Iran, two bad news. First, Russia recently allowed Iranian ships to sail up on the river Volga, which means that through the Caspian Sea, delivering even large quantity of weapons and possibly ammunition to Russia from Iran is going to become a lot easier because they don't have to rely on airlift, but they can use also ships. And the second thing, it has been documented already that Iran is delivering not only weapons, but also a lot of military equipment. I mean, Ukrainians captured the first Russian soldiers armed with or equipped with Iranian helmets, Iranian bulletproof vests, and this is something that is very likely to continue. Right now, Russia has a plan, or they are planning with the Iranians to set up a drone production facility on Russian soil. From the Iranian side, this would be an intention, or this would be aimed at kind of circumventing the sanctions. We will see how it goes. It's not quick to set up a drone production factory, but taking into account that Russia might well be preparing for a sustained conflict, if they become able to produce Iranian drones themselves as well, apart from the ones produced in Iran, that might also not be beneficial for Ukraine. So that's it from me for the start. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to try answering them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, András, for these interesting insights. Let's just move on to Stefan now, who will also speak a little about the Russian intentions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you again also for inviting me and the possibility to speak. I just wanted to add to what András just said. What we see also in the last month that Russia is doing or has agreed on with Iran and also with Azerbaijan to improve the North-South corridor. So they're really investing not only in the corridor to Turkey to circumvent sanctions, but also to improve trade also on the North-South corridor to Iran. Just as a footnote, I just want to talk about in a very sober way how the internal system is reshuffling in Russia at the moment, and what does it mean for the war and in middle term. Just a quick to pick up what András has been said. So after the loss of Kherson, we observe, as also András said, a regrouping and redeploying of Russian troops towards Donbass, and more pressure on the Ukrainian army in this region. I do not expect big gains of Ukraine in this winter. The war will go on, but because of the temperature and the exhaustion also of the troops on both sides, I think we will not see at the same scale this war as we have seen it before. But it will not, I think there were a lot of experts saying there will be like a pause, a break in this winter. That will not be the case, I think, as we already see it and as we already know. What we can observe since the attack on the bridge of Kerch in the beginning of October is a large-scale, constant and systematic attack against Ukrainian civil infrastructure. And as the ambassador said, to break the moral of the Ukrainian society, to push more migrants into Europe, to force the European countries to put Ukraine under pressure with regard to compromises, and to increase the costs of the war for Ukraine and for the Western donors. So we are now talking about reconstruction of Ukraine, but I think we have to spend much more money in just keeping or rebuilding, also in short term, and supporting Ukraine with its infrastructure, yeah, in all areas. And I think that's very crucial now, but that will also cost additional money. It is now obvious that the comprehensive attacks are not a reaction to what happened with the bridge, Kerch Bridge, but they were systematically prepared by the Russian army. So it's a shift of strategy, and they are accompanied by cyber attacks on the Ukrainian civil infrastructure, which is all the time going on. But I think we can see also here that this is also a parallel strategy. My impression is that the assessment of the Ukrainian leadership about how the war further will develop and possible next gains is by far too positive. I do not see any sign of interest from the Russian side to make concessions in negotiations. Also, the discussion about that there might be soon negotiations between Ukraine and Russia and about the grain deal as a possible example are misleading, in my opinion. In the opposite, with the partly mobilization, the Russian leadership is preparing for a longer war. Furthermore, with the appointment of General Surovikin to lead the offensive, this war has become more brutal, but also is getting better coordinated from the Russian side. We will see in spring a possible new offensive from the Russian side. Then people who have been mobilized will be ready to fight. So there will be more people coming in who are more professional than those people who are fighting at the moment. At the moment, it's about stopping the Ukrainian offensive. In spring, it might be about a further, or again, a Russian counteroffensive. Furthermore, the Russian leadership is trying to improve, and I think that's now crucial. This is my main point, to improve military supply and logistics, and is moving closer to a war economy. President Putin has ordered the creation of a coordination council for military supplies and logistics, simultaneously with the declaration of martial law in the 4 annexed regions of Ukraine. This new body consists of 19 people and is headed by Prime Minister Mishustin, who is a civilian, belongs to the technocrats, and a very good manager. 2 of his deputies, Dmitry Grigorenko, will be responsible for financing and regulatory questions, and Denis Manturov with supply of arms, equipment, and food for military personnel. 4 deputy ministers and the Minister of Economic Development and Ministry of Finance are also appointed to the structure. Moscow Mayor Sobyanin is part of it and heads of law enforcement agency and security services, like Minister of Defense Shoigu, Alexander Botnikov, head of FSB, Viktor Zolotov, head of National Guard, and Sergei Narishkin, head of Foreign Intelligence, are also part of this structure. So I think that's a very interesting new structure, and I think that will be crucial for the war. The council is a combination of key civil and security elites and should help to improve all logistical aspects of the army. The council already formed working groups headed by deputy prime ministers to deal with the supply of arms, equipment, and for military personnel. First, energy infrastructure and logistics. Second, medical support and compensation payment. Third, food supply and energy. Fourth, digitalization, communication, and analytical support. So all areas where Russia have been not very strong in the past months. This is a new infrastructure which, beside the mobilization, should help to fix the shortages of troops, to solve logistical and equipment problems of the Russian army, and especially ahead of the spring when a new offensive might come. The council should help to transfer, that's the next point, Russian economy into a war economy, solve the immediate problems that arise, but also reform the administrative procedures and the entire management system of the war, which have been proved very inefficient in the past. This is about improving efficiency and overcoming the shortages of the Russian army. Moscow Mayor Sobyanin, who is also discussed since several years as a possible successor to Vladimir Putin, has a special status in the council because he's heading the working group related to the regional level. Beside improving the situation of the families of soldiers, he will deal also with with support of the military-industrial complex, including the increase of production capacities and of all equipment the army needs. Beside this structure, we also have a coordination structure on the regional and the municipal level headed by the governors and the mayors. So there's really a new structure set up for managing this war on the Russian side. This pyramid system, and that's my last point, this pyramid system of governance should help to overcome the huge inefficiency of the existing system, which has been one of the reasons for the big failures of the Russian army. This new structure reflects the shift of the war in Ukraine from a special military operation to a long-term project of the Russian leadership. Siloviki, technocrats and businessmen have been brought under one structure of control and coordination. It shows again that Putin is trusting the management capacities of the technocrats more than of the Siloviki. And as we can see it in the management of the Russian economy, the very efficient management of the Russian economy, where the system liberals are still in key positions, this is the right decision from the Russian leadership side. At the same time, this does not mean, I think that's also important, that the Siloviki are losing power. But a lot of responsibility and functionality has been transferred to Prime Minister Mishutin. So he will be also responsible for failures, in this sense. The council will help to solve conflicts among the different interest groups, and Putin will control it and make the final decisions. So I think what we can see, and that's my final sentence, what we can see is again the ability of adapt of the Russian system to a new situation, and its ability also to create and to raise resources, to regroup and to increase also the efficiency of the whole system. If that's in the end will be more successful, we will have to see, but I think we will see it in spring. And we will then also see it during the next year. So I stop here at this point.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Very interesting analysis. As expected, we have a lot of questions coming up, but let me sort of use my position as a chair to put one question to Ambassador Feldhusen. We've heard from Stefan, also from András, the Russian leadership expect a long war, and they're prepared for that. Is that also the expectation on the Ukrainian side?
It's difficult to say here because publicly there have been different statements. Only I think this week, Deputy Defense Minister who thinks the war will be over by next summer, and even the head of the Office of the President, Andrei Yermak, said, we have no concrete information when the war will be over. That for Andrei Yermak, that sounded a lot like saying, this might last much longer than we wish and then some expect. At the same time, I think Ukrainians feel the pressure. They know that, as Mr. Rácz said, there's a lot of not reconstruction, but just emergency fixing, as we see now with the energy infrastructure, but of other infrastructure to do already here. And if Russia continues to destroy this infrastructure, at some point the question is who will pay for it, and not only who will pay for it, but where are the spare parts to fix all these things? This is already a problem for the energy infrastructure. But I think when you look at the polls, most of the Ukrainians expect the war to end next year.
Thank you very much. And maybe the first question from the chat also to the ambassador, sort of on responding to this alliance which is forming between Russia and Iran, also sort of in a very sort of when it comes to military supplies. Do you see is Germany sort of aware of that? Is it taking a stand? Is there time to be more sort of outspoken about this this development?
I think Germany sees this very clearly. We are in contact with the Ukrainians to have concrete proof so that we have a good foundation for sanctions, possibly against Iran for these actions. I'm not in the details of this, but Ukrainians also point out very clearly here how this alliance is hurting Ukraine, and we will certainly continue watching this closely and acting on it.
Thank you very much. And maybe I should mention to journalistic colleagues in this call, this is an open call. It's not Chatham House. You can quote from this and use the information you're getting here. We've got a number of questions now. I would like to take 3 in a row. Please introduce yourself and put your question as concisely as possible. Feldhusen is first, please.
Thank you very much. Philip Hesmans, and I work on clean energy transition. So I have a question for each of the panelists. First to András. How do you assess the impact of the cyber attacks versus the rocket attacks? And how do you also assess the capability of the Ukraine to upgrade their air defense systems to protect their critical infrastructure, in particular the energy infrastructure? To Stefan, the question, with this new pyramid scheme that you outlined, what's the impact of corruption? We've seen the figure that everything is 10 times more expensive than it needs to be because of the various stages of corruption. Do you have an estimate on how far that's coming down through this system? And lastly, to Ambassador Feldhusen, again on the energy infrastructure, what are the plans of Germany and Europe to help rebuild and at the same time make it more resilient, the energy, maybe also more essential, the Ukrainian energy infrastructure, in particular with a view that a war that might be going on for another 2 years or something? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next up is my DGAP colleague, Eileen Matley.
Good morning. I'm research fellow in the DGAP Security and Defense Program. I would like to direct a question to Ambassador Feldhusen. Do you see the mood shifting in Berlin and other European capitals with regard to further assisting Ukraine, including the military side of things, as viewed especially from Kiev? In other words, do you think that we will continue to see unwavering support, or do you see Western morale, so to speak, crumbling in a sense? Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Eileen. And last in this round is Konstantin Krome, please.
Yeah, good morning to all. Konstantin Krome, my name. I'm a student at the University of St. Andrews, and I'd like to address my question to Dr. András Rácz. You elaborated that the Dnieper will serve as a natural barrier for the winter, literally freezing the conflict in the south. Given that any Ukrainian advance will require great logistical pioneering and amphibious effort across the river, what kind of requests for weapon systems can we, as Western states, prospectively expect from the Ukrainian side? Thank you very much.
Many thanks. Maybe András, you want to pick that question at an earlier one?
Roger, thank you. I try to answer the questions in reverse order. So to Konstantin's question about what kind of weapons system requests can we expect from Ukraine, I think air defense, modern air defense system will remain standing on the top of the list. Modern air defense system in this context means such systems like the Iris-T or some others which also have missiles, some missile defense capabilities. So air defense will be the priority. Second, Ukraine will have to keep pushing also for receiving the sustained supplies of artillery ammunition. And of course, we will also hear from the Ukrainians and keep hearing that they would need modern Western tanks as well. And of course, everything else, but these seem to be the priorities at least for now. When it comes to any kind of amphibious operation across River Dnipro, I'm very skeptical on that, mostly due to logistical reasons and also because Ukraine learned actually from Russia's example how vulnerable your own supply channels are if you have to cross a river of such size. To Philip's question about impacts of cyber attacks versus the missile attacks, well, missile attacks are a lot more destructive. I mean, Ukrainian cybersecurity is surprisingly resilient. This resilience has been built up well before the war. And we should always remember, I mean, Ukraine is a country with a really remarkable IT capability. And they use these IT capabilities combined with Western support to build up a really resilient system, really resilient to cyber attacks. This is not the case with missile attacks. And your second question, Philip, about Ukraine's ability to defend its critical infrastructure, whether they are able to upgrade their air defenses. No, not really. They are getting better in doing damage control, but still the Russian attacks seems to have the upper hand. We speak here about a country of immense size. I mean, Ukraine is more than 600,000 square kilometers. You can't protect each and every element of critical infrastructure in such a large territory, particularly because Russia seems to have, the best word here to use, Russia seems to have a rather intimate knowledge on the details of the Ukrainian energy system. They know where the critical transformators are located. They know where the junction points are located. They know each and every element and critical elements of the Ukrainian energy system. So I think that Ukraine is able to mitigate the Russian damage, but so far, if Russia maintains the present operational pace, operational speed, they will keep downgrading Ukraine's energy infrastructure.
Thank you very much. Stefan, maybe you want to address the question of corruption. Can we still sort of call Russia a kleptocracy if there's nothing to steal here?
Definitely. I think the whole system is built on corruption. Yes, it's a system immanent, and there will be always corruption in the system because it creates the loyalty also towards the regime. And I think the key question is, does the regime still has enough, or the leadership to supply also among the system in terms of rent seeking? Yeah, and is it running out on one point? And that could, for instance, raise a leadership change also if this is not anymore the case. But as we can see it, I think the liberals in the system are very efficient in stabilizing the macroeconomic situation. I think the situation is becoming more difficult with the sanctions for the Russian economy. Technology sector is really has huge problems with the sanctions, but they are still not running out of cash. And I don't see in the foreseeable future, let's say 2 years, it depends on many factors, that they're really running out of money. With regard to this council I mentioned, I think the idea is also to create mutual control systems on every level. I think Putin trusts here more also the civilians, the technocrats, who are very good in efficient solutions, also in tech solutions. And I think there will be a strong pressure also to show success. So I think it's not so easy just to grab the money or the resources like in the past when nobody was looking what is really happening in the military. Now I think the president is really looking for it. He wants to see results. So I think it will be more difficult also just to take the money and create Potemkin villages. Yeah. So I think there will be more efficiency in my opinion, but it will have limits also because of the system. Yeah. I just want to say I have to leave a little bit early because I have to catch a plane, but I stay as long as I can stay. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Stefan. We're aware. Ambassador Feldhusen, maybe you want to pick up on some of the questions, Elise.
On energy infrastructure, how to make it more resilient. I think the Ukrainians are already, while fixing the system, also making it more resilient. I have traveled to several communities that have switched to heating by wood scraps, with the wooden with wood pellets. That makes it much easier for those communities to survive the winter in terms of heat. And we have a lot of interest in providing biogas facilities that would also help to decentralize the energy system. This is in the general mood of the more long-term rebuilding. Of course, Ukraine wants to rebuild its energy system better and greener. I think I see one issue where we will probably especially probably with my home country, have a discussion that is nuclear power. Fortunately, here, one of the 3 still working nuclear power stations was reconnected to the grid this morning after all 3 had been taken off yesterday. Yeah. But Ukraine has huge possibilities for green energy, also wind and solar. They already have hydro energy in rather big amounts. So Ukraine was one of our pilot project countries for green hydrogen before the war. And I think this is the direction where the rebuilding in the energy system will also take place. Right now, we try to help Ukraine with fixing the most important stuff, auto transformers, substations, and the Ministry of Energy, but also the German energy companies are really trying their utmost to help. For the mood changing, seen from the Ukrainian side, Ukrainians always are afraid that moods change in our capitals. They have been so for several years. The famous word of Ukraine fatigue is very present in their minds. I think the absolutely intensive and I think very good, very strategic communication campaign that President Zelensky is leading is a consequence of this. They do want to remind their partners that this war is going on and worse than ever, and they will need a lot of support, military, financial, and other, in order to withstand Russia. At the same time, they always say we're thankful for the help of our partners, but if we have to, we will also fight Russia alone. We fight for the freedom of our children, of our country, and we will continue doing that whatever happens.
Thank you very much. Let's take a second round of questions. First is General Wittmann. Please introduce yourself.
Good morning. I am Klaus Wittmann, former general. I teach contemporary history at Potsdam University, and this semester, recent history of Ukraine. And I started by quoting to the students Karl Schlögel, who once wrote, "We all have to go back to school because we all have taken the habit of looking at Ukraine merely through Russian eyes." Now, I salute the DGAP for bringing our ambassador, Kiev, to us, and I salute the ambassador for what she said about the motivation and stamina of the Ukrainian people, and also for holding out yourself. Now, since you talked about specific weapon systems, I want to ask, for obvious reasons, not you, but András, Rácz, the following. If Russia makes these medium-term changes about which Stefan Meister talked, is it not all the more important to enhance the momentum of the Ukrainian counterattacks, which means, in addition to artillery and air defense, armored personal carriers and combat tanks? And if we do not want to do a German Alleingänge, which we hear every day, then would you not also support what, for instance, the ECFR proposed, that the 13 Leopard nations in NATO Europe would get together and, in the way of a consortium, do something with regard to delivery of tanks? And also, what do you say about the fact that we deliver the very capable Marder APC to Greece, which in turn gives to Ukraine the much lesser effective and even for the teams dangerous BMP-1 APCs?
Thank you very much. Next up is Dominic Turksdorf, our DGAP colleague. Dominic, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Henning, and thank you very much for the really interesting discussion. My question is also very specifically to Ambassador Feldhusen. Thank you for the insights from the ground. My question is also again on the mood changing in the Western countries. And it's to what extent do you feel anxiety on the part of the Ukrainian government that the US military aid to Ukraine might change over the next year or so? And to what extent could you feel that there was some sort of relief that the red wave in the United States didn't happen in the latest midterm elections, when the Republicans only won control over the House? But at the same time, to what extent do you feel the pressure growing on the European countries? And that is, again, what we have already discussed here, the pressure growing on the European countries to increase their support in case the US reduces its support in the next 2 years or so. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And Dominic Tosser is, of course, one of our US experts. Boris Ginsdorf, please, as the last question for this round. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello, my name is Boris Ginsburg. I'm a doctoral researcher at the Free University of Berlin. I've got a question to Ambassador Feldhusen about, it's maybe a little bit far ahead, but about the post-war situation in Ukraine, a possible post-war situation in Ukraine. I'm interested in the fact that after the war, we will have a highly militarized Ukraine in the neighborhood of the EU, mixed with the fact that there will be a lot of traumatized fighters, a lot of children without fathers, and all this in one mix could result in highly increase of criminality in Ukraine, but also some security issues for the EU. I would like to know whether the Foreign Ministry has already maybe some plans how to deal with such situation especially in regard to demilitarization and reintegration of fighters. Thank you. And maybe one last thing, I would like to ask the organizers of this morning briefing whether it will be possible to maybe someday organize a session about the role of Belarus in this war. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That is indeed a question we've discussing and hope to meet your demand on that as well. Thank you very much. I think it's time to go to Ambassador Feldhusen again.
Yes, thank you for the questions. I think you should ask the Americans on the US-Ukraine relations. What I see is that the US keeps providing very regularly. And again, yesterday there was an announcement of more military aid. And I think for the Ukrainians, this is extremely important. The US are the biggest provider of military aid. So far, they can count on that. My experience with Ukraine is that they are anyway not people who plan a long time ahead, probably from personal experience, and this has become much more important during the war. This is the short-term planning, is this reaction to what is happening every day. And so far, they can rely very well on what is coming from the US. And they will, of course, hope that this goes on. At the same time, they also ask the European countries to provide more. You have seen that in various aspects. What I've already mentioned, the IRIS-T system really motivated other partners to also provide air defense systems. And that was one of the most positive aspects of it. The post-war situation, I think Germany is particularly well placed to deal with the issues that you mentioned. Already since 2014, we have had a lot of projects on helping traumatized children and mothers and fathers. We could kind of continue these projects without a break by moving them from the east of Ukraine to the west. And these projects continue with IDPs at the moment, but will of course also continue with the victims of warfare more in the east as they come as IDPs to the west. At the same time, we have also had several projects on the elimination of small arms and light weapons that will certainly also go on. So I share your idea that yes, this population will be much more militarized than before. But at the same time, I think our experience since 2014 has been that we can deal with it, and we have already dealt with it, and we can go on the experience of these projects since 2014. Criminality in itself, there was never very much criminality in Ukraine, even after 2014-15, even though there were so many weapons. It's more about domestic violence. So I think altogether, we will be able to deal with it, but mental health is an issue that Ukrainians very often talk to us about.
Thank you very much. You somehow sort of skittled the question about the Leopard tanks, also maybe and clearly so. I mean, there's a disagreement between the foreign minister Annalena Baerbock and the chancellor about sort of how far one should go, or also what kinds of weapons Germany should deliver. But maybe in a general way, Ambassador Feldhusen, do you see scope of increasing German, in particular, military help or European military aid for Ukraine in the near future, or do the Ukrainians have to make do with what's available right now?
If you look at what not only Germany but all the European countries have provided since the beginning of the war, this is incredible amount of weapons that we have given. And since the Bundespresseamt publishes the list of weapons that we have provided and also what we are going to provide and what is new every week, this has helped communicate our position very well in Ukraine. Ukrainians are extremely thankful because they get, from these lists, they get the feeling of how big the support is. Where this support will lead, what else will be provided, this is something you can discuss with people in Berlin. Ukrainians, as I said, live from one day to the next and work on every Baustelle, on every issue that comes up when it comes up with us and with other partners.
Thank you very much. András, maybe you want to discuss some of the questions, especially
some of them, yes, but others don't. I mean, me as a foreigner in Germany, even I've been having the privilege of working for DGAP since 2019, I try to refrain from commenting German foreign security and defense policy, because it would look odd if a foreigner would do that instead of the German colleagues. So let me not say anything about the Leopards. To generate a bit my second question about the Ringtausch, about Marders delivered to Greece and then old ex-Soviet weapons from Greece delivered to Ukraine. Sir, you probably know it much better than I do. I mean, weapon deliveries have a massive logistical component as well. And the Ringtausch scheme was invented in the very beginning of the war in order to address the urgent needs of Ukraine's armed forces, needs for such weapon systems, which they already had in service, so they could use the new ones without any extra training, any extra logistical base, any extra other supplies. So I'm personally, as long as there are still available ex-Soviet weapons on the market, I'm a great supporter of the Ringtausch scheme, particularly as long as modern weapons such as the Marders delivered in the Ringtausch scheme to our partners are delivered for other NATO countries. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And with an eye on the clock, we've got only 2 minutes left. I would like to give the last word to Ambassador Feldhusen. I just see Guntram also wants to come in.
No, thank you. So I just wanted to say, since András didn't want to comment on the German policy, I mean, it seems to me that in the current situation, I quite subscribe to the view of General Wittmann. I mean, we need to support Ukraine as much as we can, also to keep up the offensive momentum in the current situation. And I would have wished, and I've certainly expressed that also already publicly, I would have wished even more eagerness from Germany to really find schemes, perhaps together with European partners, so that we don't do it alone, but schemes that effectively allow us to deliver armored vehicles and also tanks to Ukraine at this stage. I think that's really, it would be really helpful for Ukraine in the current situation, and prevent us to end in a situation where, perhaps by the spring, as Stefan Meister points out, by the spring, the Russians are again much more organized, and then the war will be even more difficult to resolve. But that's just a quick comment here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And maybe the last word now to Ambassador Feldhusen. Maybe you want to respond to that and maybe answer the question, sort of what is the one thing the German government, but maybe also the German society as a whole can do now to help Ukraine in the best way?
I think Germany and the German population, they have shown how they support Ukraine by receiving the Ukrainian IDPs, the Ukrainian refugees in Germany. And the support there goes on. I mean, every day I hear stories from Ukrainians who say how well received and how warmly welcomed they were in Germany, and how well they still feel there, even though many of them would like to come back to their home country. This support is extremely important for Ukraine. I think what we need to keep in mind is also the communication of our support. I think Germans in general are pretty down to earth, and they do not speak much. We need to show more how we support this country, and we need to also communicate, perhaps sometimes even more symbolically than with immediate concrete actions, how we also want to see Ukraine as part of the European family. I think one of the statements from Berlin that was really so well received here was when Chancellor Scholz said at the Ukrainian-German Economic Forum that when he appealed to investors that investing in Ukraine is investing in a future member of the European Union. These statements are so important for the Ukrainians, even though they know that it will take years until they will become a member of the EU. They need to feel that we're with them on this way, and that we will support them.
Thank you very much. And with that, I'd like to close this meeting today. Please join me in thanking our speakers, Ambassador Feldhusen, András, Rácz, Stefan Meister, who has already left us. Please join us again next week. And until then, a very good morning and goodbye.